Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And we're back again with Dr. Shoaib and his smile, mashallah. How are you, Dr. Shoaib?
Alhamdulillah, Sheikh. You also have a beautiful smile, Sheikh. Why are you always
Well, thank you.
focused
That's
on me?
right. Because it's when I open up the screen, that's all I see, Sheikh, is your smile, mashallah.
Alhamdulillah.
So it's nice to see you again, Sheikh.
Alhamdulillah. Likewise. So it's good to be back every Tuesday.
Yep. Alhamdulillah. And just to let our viewers know, those who are joining us on Facebook or YouTube, inshallah, we usually wait for a few minutes just to allow our students and parents and anyone else who's tuning in to settle in, inshallah. In the meantime, if there are any questions, just get them down on the chat, and we could start our sessions with those questions. And I think that's what one of the unique things about this session is, that it's very interactive. And we do take on questions as much as possible. And we want there to be that interaction so we can gauge what everyone's thinking, what questions you may have in regards to Islam and science, or specifically evolution and Islam in this case. So as we wait, inshallah, do fire away with your questions, but we won't start the session just yet, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Assalamu alaikum. Is that Sayyid Abdullah, Mufti Hilal, Hafiza, Salah Mesti is back as well. Welcome back. And Malak Gharbi as well. So it's nice to have everyone back, mashallah.
Alhamdulillah. Oh, for those of you who are new to these sessions, I think I might as well mention, just to kind of update you guys on the kind of developments that we're doing. So since Sheikh, was it last year that I got the contract for the book? It was last year, right?
Yep.
Yeah. About a year from now, I was contracted by Routledge, which is a well-known academic publication house, and they contracted me to write a book on Islam and evolution. And the subtitle of the book is Al-Ghazali and the Modern Evolutionary Paradigm. So if we take Al-Ghazali's framework, be it his hermeneutic and his metaphysical, what kind of opinions would he reach? And that is the book that I am working on at the moment. So hopefully, now that I think everything has died down with regards to my teaching duties at my university, so we just had our final exam yesterday. I'm done with my paperwork. I can now finally just put pen to paper and finish this coming summer. This should be out, assuming everything works according to time and pace, by next year. So hopefully, the earliest that I expect it to come by is March 2021. The latest maybe is a year from now, so May 2021. Between those 2 months, inshallah. But hopefully it'll be a groundbreaking book in the sense that it takes theology very seriously. So I come from the perspective of a theological enterprise. So I accept evolution as it is. We just say, okay, hang on, let's just take evolution. How far can we accept it within Ghazali's framework? And it's hopefully in a language that anybody can appreciate the discussion. So even if you have zero background in either the science or philosophy or the theology, you'll be easily able to go through the book yourself and understand it. So hopefully that's something that I might you might be looking forward to. I'll be mentioning more details as I go along, inshallah. It's about roughly at the moment as it stands 10, 11 chapters. I still haven't finalized the details yet, but that's just something to keep in mind, inshallah, in terms of looking for a reference. And this book will also contain a chapter that summarizes of all the positions out there. It puts them into a table, which is much more easier to understand. So we have people who disagree, agree, and then you have people in between. So I mentioned them as a summary in a summative table. Alongside that, I mentioned the reasons why they agree or disagree. So hopefully that'll be a nice summary for people who are trying to get a snapshot of what's out there at the moment. Inshallah.
Inshallah. Jazakallah, Dr. Shoaib. And that's brought us to 6:05. So inshallah, we are ready to start our session. You may want to do a quick summary of the previous session for those who were not there or have forgotten, and then we can begin our session for today. Jazakallah, Sheikh. Over to you.
Barakallah fiqh, Sheikh. So I think I have to come back to you. What did we discuss last time?
That's why I threw the buck onto you, Sheikh. But I think one thing that we left off from, which you can maybe summarize, which was very interesting discussion, I think, was the concept of Adam alayhi salam, and in general the concept of prophethood. And the objective of prophet, of why are prophets sent? They are usually sent to people when they have gone astray, they've become misguided, and they are sent to those people to guide them. And there's two types. There's those who come with a new, way, with a scripture, and there are others that actually reinforce the previous scriptures.
Yep.
So, who was Adam alayhi salam sent to? That was a question that we finished off, and we spoke a bit about this. So if you want to maybe summarize from there, and we can move on to our next session from there, inshallah.
Right. Okay. So I think it was a very important point that was raised by one of the comments, and I think that in order to give this justice, I won't be able to tackle this as of yet. But what I recommend is, at the moment, is that it just give me maybe a week or two, because I'm still investigating this matter myself. So I remember I came across a few lectures which actually discusses a whole range of opinions on the distinctions between a Nabi and a Rasul, okay? And that distinction is important for the purposes of this conversation. Because as far as I can tell from my limited research within the past week, Adam alayhi salam is only referred to as a Nabi, never as a Rasul. Now, depending on which position you occupy in terms of the distinctions between these two, it will impact how you interpret Adam alayhi salam. So, and I've come across, I think, a really good lecture by Sheikh Yasir Qadi, who's done a lot of stuff on this. And I will hopefully try and share my findings maybe in a week or two's time from now. But at the moment, just to kind of make sure I don't give any low resolution answers at this stage, I will just, do tawaqquf on the matter for now.
Before you carry on, Sheikh, just one question that I had. So this question about which we had last week about Adam alayhi salam and who is he sent to. Now, was that topic going to come into your book before? If not, are you thinking about maybe adding in a few paragraphs on this?
Right. Okay. I think that's an excellent question. So as I discover, read up more and more myself and discover more and more myself, there's so many different angles that didn't come under my investigation before, right? So there's always a learning experience. This is one of those things. And there's two more that I just discovered, a couple of days ago. So unfortunately, I don't have enough space in my book to kind of go through every single idea and conceptual differences that we need to entertain this entire discussion. Having a discussion just on the Quran, forget hadith for a second, just on the Quran requires a whole PhD. Having a discussion on the hadith involved requires several PhDs. So for me to kind of fit this into a small section of a book is already a big challenging task at the moment. So the book itself is divided into 4 parts, right? The parts that are the meaty parts of the conversation are the 3rd section and the 4th section. So the 3rd section is about aqeedah and metaphysics. So what things we can accept from evolution, what things we can't. And then the 4th part is hermeneutics. Given what we have from the Quran and Hadith, what can we accept, what can we reject, right? So that I have to discuss under 30,000 words.
Dr. Shoaib?
Yeah.
I think you've got your YouTube thing on ×2. You know the fast player?
Yes.
I think you've put it on ×2 the speed. You may want to maybe take it to normal, or maybe in the minus.
All right. Okay.
Could you do the categories of your book again once more, but really slowing it down, Sheikh?
Yeah. Okay. So just to kind of revise what I said earlier on, that my book is divided into 4 parts, right? The first part is introductory stuff. The second part is a review of the current positions on Islam and science. The third part is to do with aqeedah. What can we accept from evolution? What can we reject from evolution? So these include things like naturalism, chance, purpose, all of that, right? Because evolution raises those questions for us. And finally, the last section is the Quran and Hadith, right? So and that last section, I've dedicated around 30,000 word spaces for that, whereas the whole book is 100,000 words. And I'm saying that 30,000 words is not enough just for the Quran on its own, let alone all these distinctions that I'm, getting across as I investigate further into this territory myself. So I believe that just on Hadith, you can have a PhD on Islam and evolution. Just on the Quran, you can have a whole PhD on Islam and evolution. Even just on the distinction between Nabi and Rasul, I believe it is enough material to go over this, to create it into a PhD, which is around, 60 to 80,000 words. Now I have to take all of this and summarize it to 30,000 words, which is a challenge. So I'm trying to, of course, put it in a way where it's systematic and understandable, but hopefully it gives enough space so that people investigate into these territories can have further lines of research that they themselves can look into. So my book will never be exhaustive, but what I'm trying to do in my book is just kind of deflate, one, the misconceptions that are involved that Muslims occupy. Two, get rid of the immediate negativity that we have as defense guards when it comes to evolution, and show that, look, there are nuances in this picture that we need to be wary of. And three, I then suggest two solutions that are compatible with Ghazali's framework. And these two solutions are the two positions that Yasir Qadhi adopts and Solomon Jalajal. I do not believe that Ghazali would have admitted in his hermeneutic framework that Adam alayhi salam could have had parents. I believe he would have rejected that based on Quran Hadith. This is a nutshell conclusion of my book, but I'll spill out the details in the book itself, inshallah. Was that enough 1.0 for you?
Yeah, that was much better. That was much better. Alhamdulillah. Well done, Sheikh. Well done for that. One quick question that came to mind, and I'm trying to, get into my students' shoes and ask these questions. So, why are you restricted to those number of words? Cannot your book be much larger in size?
Right. Okay. So I think there's a question of a contractual obligation. So every academic publishing house, they have to keep in mind the size of the book, right? So the bigger the book is, the more expensive it's going to be. The smaller the book is, the cheaper it can be in terms of publication, production costs, and what have you. So we've agreed between myself and Rutledge that the book has to be around 100,000 words, right? Now, is there negotiation involved with that number? Yes, we can kind of maybe do a plus minus. But I want to make sure that this book is exhaustive enough to create a foundation. And now I expect other people to hopefully fill in the gaps, right? I just want to lay the foundation theologically for the field of Islam and evolution, inshallah. So that maybe some of the young viewers who go into university may pick these questions up for themselves and may investigate and publish from their own account, inshallah.
Absolutely, inshallah. So all the students who are listening out, make sure you do this. And we have Dr. Shoaib's book coming out soon. There's also another book, Dr. Shoaib, that you are writing, and that's for Cube Publishers, I believe, in Leicester. So could you tell us a bit about that book? What's different with the Cube Publisher book that you're writing and the one for Rutledge Publishers?
Yes. So the book that I have with Cube Publishers is a general book on dealing with the relationship of Islam and science. So we have science on the one hand, we have Islam on the other. How do we as Muslims navigate that? And again, what I do is I take some of the ideas of Imam Ghazali and give a possible framework through which Muslims can comfortably understand how far we can go with the science, how far we need to kind of say, okay, these are our limitations, within a theological framework that is sophisticated enough such that any child, any teenager, and even any parent can pick up and read, inshallah. And this is not something I'll be working on until hopefully maybe November. I'll be starting. I already know what I want to write. I already have all the chapters in my head. I just need to finish this book with Rutledge on Islam and evolution. Once that's out of the way, then I'll focus on this one, inshallah. But that, if all goes well, should be out by the end of 2021, inshallah.
Inshallah. So Sheikh, it's a bit concerning. You're saying it's all in your head. You haven't written any of that down yet or any notes. So if you go out cycling, you better wear a helmet, Sheikh.
Yes, Sheikh, we do. But given the heat in Dubai, Sheikh, cycling is not an option at all.
Right. Okay. I have a question for you, Sheikh. It might be a bit of a history, bit of a psychology question, but in terms of evolution. So up until now, or a little while back, anytime there's a discussion between a parent or a student, or maybe a student and his teacher in the mosque about evolution, it always ends up with astaghfirullah, or it always ends up with haram, or it always ends up with we never came from monkeys. So what do you think led up the Muslim mind to always have this discussion which ends up in this manner?
Okay, so I think there are a couple of factors that are involved here, right? I think number one, we have to, and this is something that I've been stressing since the beginning of this series of Islam and evolution. And that is that this conversation is inherently interdisciplinary. That means you cannot just come from one specialization, be it theology, the philosophy, or the science, right? All of these are distinctive fields. You cannot just come one and then have a sweeping view of the discussion. So we will have ulama who are sincere individuals, know their fiqh, know their usul inside out, and they'll talk about the science, which is completely bogus, that has no basis in terms of understanding what the science is saying. And on the other side, we have the scientists who have no basis, no training in the theological stuff, and they'll just completely override everything in Quran, Hadith. Yep, that's evolution friendly, that's evolution friendly. Now, so the problem here is that when you have people who are trying to get into this discussion, it forces you, it mandates, it requires you to just get or appreciate some of the usul of each, or the principles of each discipline, and the underlying foundations of each discipline. When you do not appreciate that, then you will of course resort to simplicity, right? So some people, just because they're science and they believe science has pretty much defined that everything must come out of evolution, they pretty much sweep Adam as a metaphor under the rug, right? And some people who come from the Islamic training side, they will say, oh, evolution is haram, it's kufr, or whatever have you, and therefore that's another simplistic answer. Both of these are simplistic answers. They do not cater for nuances. They do not understand, or they may understand, but they do not actually appreciate that what are the flexibilities involved in this discussion. And unfortunately, evolution, so that's one problem, that the interdisciplinary nature. The second problem is atheists have done a fantastic marketing job in equating evolution equals to atheism. That's a marketing job right there. So the moment you speak evolution, it's as if you're speaking about atheism, that you want to adopt atheism. That's the problem. And these two, I think, are fundamentally the main problems with the whole discussion. And that's what polarizes people in this debate. This is my personal experience. I know, wallahu alam, but that's what I believe is the issue.
Jazakallah, Sheikh. I think you summarized that really, really well, and made give us those examples. Just one thing I wanted to pick out from there before we go on to some of the questions that are coming up, and keeping in mind our students. So when you're saying that there are some scientists, for instance, in order for evolution to fit the narrative in the Quran, they say that Adam al-Islam is a metaphor. Can you maybe give us a scientist who does that, or maybe an example of how they do it, why they do it? Give us a bit of background as to why they are forced to make Adam al-Islam a metaphor in this whole debate about evolution.
Okay, we can do that, inshallah. So now
that's very kind of you, Sheikh.
Yeah. So just to be clear here, right? Now, when I mention these people, nothing should be inferred from this that we should start disrespecting these people. A difference of opinion should not mean any form of lack of adab from our side, just because we disagree with someone, right? Now, Rana Dajani, Dr. Rana Dajani, one of the sweetest people I personally know in all my life. She's one of the most sweetest academics, right? A molecular biologist, right up there, mashallah, top of her career. She knows her science inside out, right? Unfortunately, she is one of those people who has taken the science as a definitive, and there's nothing wrong with that. However, in some of her papers, she clearly explicitly states, it's nothing I'm inferring, this is something she explicitly states in her public works, that she believes that the story of Adam is a metaphor. That's what she believes, okay? Now this is problematic. The reason
before you explain why it's problematic, could you explain maybe for our younger viewers how would she see Adam al-Islam as a metaphor? So what would she explain the stories in the Quran or the verses about Adam al-Islam? What would she say they mean?
Right. So in her opinion, from what I remember, it's just basically these are lessons for moral principles. So you could infer from the story of Adam that you have to seek repentance. You are fallible creatures. So it's a message for humanity. So
what is Adam then? What is Adam?
He was just a character in a story. It's just a story, right? So that's what we mean by that. Now, I personally have asked her the question. I have personally asked her, do you believe that Adam is a metaphor, or the story is a metaphor, because you could still believe that the story is a metaphor without believing that Adam is a metaphor. You could still believe Adam is a literal person. You could still believe in that, right? And that distinction is important. When I asked her this, she said that this is a complication she hasn't, fully appreciated, or she hasn't looked into yet. And that's fine, fair enough. But you see, my point is that to say that all this is a metaphor without appreciating the verses involved, the Arabic involved, the hadith involved, the principles involved of interpretation, this is a very simplistic answer. And unfortunately, simplistic answers do not act as conducive traction for the discussion. If we want to have an honest dialogue, then we need to say clearly and honestly, what are the difficulties in the science? What are the difficulties in scripture? And what are the difficulties in aqidah or philosophy? Once we open those doors, then we can have an honest discussion. But I believe that this one-sided answer that, yep, science is a metaphor, or, oh, evolution is haram and kufr, these are just simplistic, slogans that do not have any weight in front of me. For young minds, particularly young Muslims, these things go a long way, because naturally we look up to our imams, we look up to our scientists, we consider them as sources of authority. I do not deny that, and nor should we ever undermine our respect for these individuals. But when you want to have a discussion, make sure you understand everything in the field. That's all I'm trying to say, right? You can then believe that evolution is false afterwards. I have no problem with that. But having an educated opinion versus a simplistic opinion is a distance between the earth and the heavens. That's what I'm trying to say. We need to recognize that and be able to address those gaps in our knowledge before saying, aha, okay, I agree or disagree.
Jazakallah for that, Sheikh. There's a somewhat of a related question, and then we'll go into Sufyan's question after that. It's on the screen. So the philosopher MMA is back, who's asking, is believing that Adam alayhi salam not having parents a part of the Aqidah?
Okay, so this is, it gets even more technical, right? So belief in the prophets, is a mandatory part. That's crystal clear, right? That is crystal clear. Belief in their creation is more of a secondary thing, right? So we believe, for example, Isa alayhi salam clearly was born without a father. We know that clearly, right? He was born without a father from the Quranic text, okay? Adam alayhi salam, now there isn't an explicit verse, so this is why I need people to appreciate where I'm coming from. We know that he was created without parents in heaven, if you believe in that interpretation, okay? That he was created in heaven without parents. But there is no 100% clear verse which says he was born without parents on earth. I mean, a verse that says Adam was born without parents on earth, khalas, case closed. The closest we have ruling that option out is the analogy that has been set in Surah Imran in verse 57, where you have Isa being compared to Adam. Okay, that is the closest analogy that we have, right? And the interpretation of that analogy is, well, if you consider Isa to be divine, Jesus to be divine because he had no father, this means that Adam should be even more miraculous because he was born without a mother and the father, right? However, this interpretation is not mentioned in the verse. It's not mentioned. It is inferred by the verse, okay? So this is now when, is this the best inference or not, or whatever have you. Now, because it's an inference and not an explicit text that says, like explicit text means like Allah is one. Qul huwa Allahu ahad. Khalas, no debate. No debate about Allah's oneness, okay? Or, if you say that Allah said believe in the Prophet ﷺ, no debate about that. Allah said pray, no debate about that. All of those are non-negotiable, right? But there's no one verse that says that Allah was created without parents on earth, if you believe that he was created in heaven. And as a result of that, we can say the strongest interpretation is that Adam was born without parents. This is my personal belief. I'm just telling you my personal belief. That Adam was born without parents, that's crystal clear. That if he was born in heaven, no problem. But to say that he was born without parents on earth, there is ambiguity there. Now, it doesn't mean that this has no weight. It's the strongest interpretation of this verse. So that's the likeliest meaning of this verse. But because there's no explicit 100% Allah saying Adam was born without parents on earth, I cannot say that definitively. Do you see my point? Now, if there's room for that ambiguity, from an aqidah point of view, we have to believe he existed. And we believe in miracles, that he was created without parents, if you believe in the heavenly interpretation, right? And if so, then I don't think this is necessarily a part of aqidah. Some may argue, some may say, yeah, it has to be a part of aqidah. We believe he was born without parents. That's if you believe that this is a qat'i issue, a definitive issue. From what I can tell, this is not 100% qat'i. The idea that he was born without parents on earth. That's all I'm saying. But I personally believe that the strongest interpretation, the likeliest interpretation, like 95% the interpretation of that verse is that he was born without parents. But I cannot persuade myself to say this is qat'i, as in qat'i 1 + 1 = 2. It is not clear like that in the Quran for me. God knows best.
Jazakallah. Okay, so as promised, we are going to take some questions. Is that okay with you, Dr. Shoaib?
Yep.
Okay, so coming from Sufyan, Assalamu alaikum. In one of your previous sessions, you spoke about hermeneutic scientism. Could you further elaborate on that? Also, another question I had was regarding the proponents of Darwinian evolution, and even Darwin himself used elements of racism to justify his position. How do we reconcile such aspects of Darwinian evolution with Islam?
Okay. I'll answer that.
I'll keep the question there, yeah, so that you can see it.
Sure. I just wanted to point out, philosopher MMA, please let me know if I addressed your question, because that was a very sensitive question, and I want to make sure there is no ambiguity in my answer. So please do let us know, inshallah, right? With regards to Sufyan's question, wa alaikum salam, first of all, I spoke about hermeneutic scientism. Yes. So hermeneutic scientism is pretty much this idea that we interpret Quran Hadith according to the demands of science. So, and that means sometimes stretching the interpretation of a verse or a Hadith which does not have bearing according to the language. So, for instance, science does not permit miracles. Okay, within the scientific framework, miracles don't exist. The idea of converting a stick into a snake, as per the story of Musa alayhi salam, is impossible. The idea of putting your stick down on the ground and then the sea splitting apart is impossible. The idea of the moon splitting is impossible scientifically, right? Now, if you then take the science seriously, all of these are metaphors, or you have to explain them somehow that violates the literal interpretation. So, and the problem is, from an usul point of view, usul al-tafsir, we take things literally unless and otherwise the context indicates so. There is nothing in the language of the Quran to tell us that these are metaphorical or that they're some kind of analogy, right? Because Allah himself tells us when he's establishing an analogy, right? But in these cases, there doesn't seem to be an analogy. And all our ulama, even in the past, did not have an issue with interpreting things literally, okay? Because the language did not permit it so. Now, hermeneutic scientism pretty much is this idea that you take science at the face value, but then you ignore all of these principles of usul al-tafsir, interpreting the Quran, and then you just overrun it with whatever science has to say. So if you don't believe in miracles, then you believe that all these stories of the prophets are just either metaphors or they're just some kind of fictitious fables to give you a moral lesson. That's what I mean by hermeneutic scientism. Sheikh, did that answer that question, you think?
Yeah, I think so, it did. And Sufyan can let us know just as a philosopher as well. Yeah. The philosopher said, yeah, sure, I had doubt on that topic, and thanks for clearing it. So that's from the philosopher.
Right, okay. With regard to the second question of Sufyan, so yes, advocates of Darwinian evolution may have advocated this idea that that there is a racial difference and therefore an evolutionary difference between people. However, bear in mind that they were still living within the aura of colonialism and imperialism, right? Where they believed European civilization was at the foremost front. Okay. Now we have to be careful in making sure that an idea is not taken to represent the values of the time, right? So people believe in evolution today, but they don't necessarily believe that a black individual or a white individual, are different in that sense, right? Racial profiling is very different to a scientific difference between the two. Another thing that I wanted to mention here is that there's a difference between the science of evolution and the social-political extension of evolution, right? The science of evolution just tells us biologically how these different species come about. Now, the interpretation of people that this person is more valuable than that person based on values does not come out of evolution. That is something that we can take as an inspiration from evolution, but we inject it with our own value system. Science will never tell you values. Values don't come in, test tubes. Values don't come in microscopes. Values is what you impose on the data. So if the value system at the time was that there are racial differences and European civilization is better, then they will see that in the data, or they will impose that in the data. But that does not mean that the socio-political construction of evolution is the same thing as the science of evolution. And this is known as Darwinian, social Darwinism. And that is not a scientific theory. That is a social-political theory that transplants some of the principles of the science onto the social political spectrum, but may not have any scientific basis to it whatsoever. God knows the best.
Yep. And Sufyan said that the first answer was answered. Jazakallah. Going to the next question by Ferinho Jackson. Should we not concentrate on the fact that Darwinian naturalistic view on evolution is dependent on a premise which cannot be proven by the scientific method itself? So could you firstly explain that question, Dr. Shoaib, and then answer that in very simple terms?
Okay, Darwinian naturalistic view. So you see, this is one of the... So first of all, thank you, Ferinho Jackson, for answering that question. This is a good question. So one of the things that I think is assumed in this question is that Darwin equals to naturalism, right? That's what this assumes. Now, naturalism is assumed in every scientific theory. That is not specific to evolution nor Darwinism. The function of science is to understand nature through naturalistic explanations. Electrons are explained through nature. Protons are explained through nature. Gravity is explained through a natural framework. Science is only in the business of giving us explanations through the natural framework. So there's nothing specific in evolution to distinguish it from these other scientific theories. If you want to gun down evolution because of naturalism, then you have to gun down everything in science, which includes your laptops, which includes your mobile phones, which includes your planes, your flight tickets, everything that you rely on today. Okay? So it makes for an inconsistent method. That is very important to understand. Okay? Now, within the discussion of naturalism, we have to understand that there are two different kinds of naturalism that we can use for our advantage. One is the position of philosophical naturalism, which is the belief that nature is all there is. And this is something that Muslims outrightly reject. No Muslim, at least given the orthodox perspective, which is where I'm coming from, no Muslim will accept naturalism because we believe there are things beyond nature. Angels, jinns, Allah being some of them. Okay? Now, the other position is methodological naturalism, where science is only capable, its scope is only able to give us explanations from a natural paradigm. Okay? And whether the question of angels and God, those are not scientific questions. You then leave the fold of science. Now, we can adopt the prism of methodological naturalism and say that given the scope of science, this is the best explanation, naturally, right? Do we believe that human beings are completely naturalistic? Of course not. We believe we have a soul, which is immaterial, right? But in terms of our physical bodies, in terms of our physical apparatus, could that be a product of evolution? Could be. Allahu Akbar, it could be. According to the science, that's what we get, right? So this is something that we need to point out very clearly. Now, so when you say that this is not proven by science itself, I agree. But science needs a few presumptions to get off the ground. One of the presumptions is nature is our source for explanation. The moment we stop resorting to nature for explanations, we have left science. So this is not a criticism of science, it's actually a limitation of science. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, I think there was a follow-on to that from Ferinho as well. I'll bring that on the screen. And that's from the first question, which is nowadays highly disputed in their core assertions on an academic level, and which was formed into a secular religion even by academics and biologists. Is this scientism, do you think, that Ferinho is referring to?
Okay, so I think that, like I said, how academics and biologists perceive the scope of evolution and science will depend from one person to another. So I cannot generalize. That's the first thing. Number two, if a person believes that science can explain everything, this is scientism, where they believe that science is the best measuring stick for everything. Even God has to come under science. The way this question is even framed then is problematic, because we don't believe in that from the get-go. So that would be my answer to that question. Do you think that addressed it, Sheikh?
Yeah, it definitely addressed that question. Just for our students and parents, could you maybe, in the light of evolution, explain science and scientism, as in what are the differences?
Right.
Where might they be similar, and where are they different, and which one of those do we agree with?
Right. Okay, yeah. So I think this is an important question, because what I don't want to end up happening is Muslims end up rejecting science altogether, because that makes for inconsistent worldview, right? If you want to reject science, pretty much literally turn off your laptops, stop living in this world, because this world is based on science, right? Literally stop living in this world. So that's one extreme. The other extreme is we believe that science governs everything. Now, science is a methodology, or a group of methods which we use to come up with explanations about the natural world around us. This is what science tells us. The science tells us that our universe is very finely tuned. We have a Big Bang. Evolution is true. We have quarks. We have protons. We believe in string theory, whatever have you, right? All of those are scientific explanations according to the methodology of science. Scientism, however, is no longer a methodology. It is an ideology. And this ideology believes that science can explain everything, including our consciousness, including the origin of the universe without referring to God, including stuff like ethics. All of those are beyond the measuring stick of science according to us. And even philosophy of science. Philosophy of science, I think, completely understands that science has limits. It cannot explain everything. So Muslims have no problem adopting science according to the rubric of methodological naturalism, number one. But Muslims will have huge issues with scientism, because that is not our measuring stick to understand the world around us to begin with. Wallahu alam.
Jazakallah. One of our students has put a question in, a very young student.
Yeah.
He has mentioned, he's mentioned, why would nature be a
Sheikh,
source
can you put up
of...
the question?
Yep, sorry. Yep, so Hussein Tahir is saying, why would nature be a source of information for science? Why not anything else?
Right. Okay, this is a good one, right? So just like how we have, so whenever we want to investigate something, right, we have certain tools in place to tell us what we use to be able to address that question. So, I mean, to make this a very simple analogy, if I wanted to bang open, something that's quite heavy, like a metal box, I will use a hammer, right? I'm not going to use a little toothpick to try and hammer it out. It's going to be ineffective, right? So we have the right tool for the right purpose. Within these different disciplines, science uses the tools given to it to understand nature, right? But we're not going to use other tools because they don't conform to the tools of science, right? So mathematics, for example, mathematics cannot be used to understand history. There are certain things which we do, like proof theorems and calculus. You're never going to be able to use calculus to understand historical facts. Calculus will not tell you Julius Caesar existed, nor will looking at history books tell you about mathematics. If you look at a history book or an encyclopedia from the 17th, 16th, 15th century, no one is going to tell you about differentiation, integration, polynomials. That doesn't happen. These are two different methodologies. So the science is the reason why we have a limit for it is because its purpose, its function, its scope is to understand the natural world. That is what it was designed to do. I hope that answered your question.
Definitely, Sheikh. Jazakallah. There are a few suggestions here. Could I bring them forward? From Salah Mesti. You should create a kind of visual mind map of all the different views and positions. It will be useful.
My answer? Wait for my book.
Yeah.
Chapter number 4.
So you're going to have a visual of all the ideas?
Yeah.
Interesting.
It's a table.
Okay.
It's a table with a summary of every single opinion out there.
I think this might be the same one. You should create a
same thing.
Okay, yeah, same thing. Okay, cool. There's another question which seems like an interesting one from the philosopher MMA. Whenever I see philosopher MMA, it just gives me a vision of two philosophers fighting in that cage. Okay, so Dr. Shoaib shared a video on Facebook of a video which claims to show evolution in the Quran by Rational Religion, Ahmadiyya channel. What were his thoughts on the video?
So
Interesting.
Yeah, so there's a video that I shared. For those of you who follow me on Facebook, you can find it. It's somewhere on my wall. And it's a video that I didn't know at the time was, well, not by me at the time. After I posted, I found out that it was run by Ahmadis, right? So for those of you who don't know what Ahmadiyya is, so Ahmadiyya is a group within Islam that was considered to be outside orthodoxy, mainstream Islam, back, I think it was in the 20th century, mid-20th century. There was a council meeting in Pakistan somewhere, and they declared that these guys are not orthodox Muslims, okay? So that's what the Ahmadiyya group represents, according to the frame of Sunni Islam. Now, the way they approached the Quran, I felt was very poor, because first of all, they missed several important verses in there that are relevant to the discussion. The primary one being that the similitude between Adam and Isa. This was completely missed in their discussion. The other thing was they did something where they looked at verses that could suggest evolution based on terminology, and that was a very weak inference for me, right? I felt that that was not justified at all. If you want to look into Islam and evolution, you have to go to the main discussion, and the central point of the discussion is and Adam. I don't think that was at all touched in the entire conversation. So I feel that going around that by looking at these evolutionary friendly readings based on these verses that are quite far from the context, you know, that for me had no weight. That was my personal opinion on that. But within, you know, a disagreement on interpretation should not mean a disagreement on the social level. Still utmost respect to them, but I humbly disagree with them.
I mean, based on some of my experience in readings as well, when I was back at university, do you feel that there's at times, when it comes to the Ahmadiyya community, a weak hermeneutics and a weak form of interpretation of verses and of ahadith? Do you feel that?
I am not qualified to answer that question, Sheikh. This is not my area.
Okay. Just to give you an example, is it okay for me to mention that here?
Yeah, of course. Go ahead.
Sure, yeah. So I remember when I was doing my undergraduate degree, I was researching eschatology in Islam. So the verses or the ahadith about the end of days. And when it came to, for example, some of the ahadith that mention Prophet Isa alayhi salam, right? So there's this one hadith which talks about him, descending on the eastern side of Damascus by the white minaret. So I looked up at the Ahmadiyya interpretation of that, because obviously with Ghulam Ahmad Qadiani, he was born in Qadian, which is in India. So they reinterpret that hadith to say, look, yes, India is on the eastern side of so if you look at Damascus, on the east of Damascus, if you keep on going, you'll end up in India and in Qadian. So there were a lot of interpretations I found in that manner. So do you think we can take some of their reading seriously when it comes to evolution?
So I think that you have to bear in mind that so they believe in a messenger after the Prophet ﷺ, right? And that's where we have a major source of disagreement with them. And believe it or not, the discussion about Nabi and Adam, Nabi and Rasul plays a big part in this conversation. Yeah. So and that's why I said, like, for me, this is not an area that I'm an expert in. But putting that aside, in several places Allah referred to as the Prophet as Khatam, the seal, right? And so that's where we take our revelational stance that we do not believe anyone can be a prophet or a Rasul after Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Whereas they believe in otherwise. They believe in this figure Ahmad Ghulam Mirza, and they believe that he represents a messenger after the Prophet ﷺ. And now but like I said, I am not an expert in this territory to be able to make any or pronounce any judgments. But someone like you would know better than me. Wallah, God knows the best.
Jazakallah Shaykh. Salah has just said nice exclamation mark, and I think he's referring to your visuals that are going to be coming out in your book, inshallah. So inshallah. Wait for the book, inshallah. Make sure you get that book. Hussein Tahir said, yes, it answered my question. Jazakallah, Professor. Okay. Brilliant. Alhamdulillah. So now we've passed 45 minutes. And And I think we had a lot of good information around evolution. And I think sessions like this are important because they make us understand that when we talk about evolution, it's not just strictly just evolution that we need to know about. It's all the disciplines around evolution. And that's something that you started off with as one of the problems that we've had in the Muslim world. That you have people from just talking from their own discipline, regardless of what other disciplines say, and it's important to have all the disciplines come together in that sense. Yes.
I don't have a restriction in time. We can go on for another 15 minutes.
Oh, nice, very nice. Jazakallah, Sheikh. So yeah, so do carry on, Sheikh.
With what, Sheikh?
So okay, so I'm thinking of a question, Sheikh. I did have one a few minutes ago, but I think I was focusing too much on your concentration that I forgot. Mm-hmm. But so there, yes, there was also a third book that you were about to write.
Yes. And
who was that for? Which publishing house, and what is that about?
So the third book that I have in mind is a book that I'm still thinking about how to write it, but it's to do with atheism and Islam. So it's a book that argues for the existence of God and in a manner that everyone can appreciate. So there's no complications involved, and hopefully it'll be a unique book in the sense that it'll be a contribution towards some of the developments that we can create. And there are several, of course, we have arguments for God's existence, and they have several objections. What I want to do is I want to take the best argument, focus on that, and then show how some of these objections against it do not make sense. Okay, so that will be the purpose of that, and that is meant to be a simple book that any Muslim can read, inshallah.
Inshallah. Have you got the contract signed with any
no.
publishing house?
This is 3 years down the line. Yeah.
Okay. When you said the best argument, could you just tell us which one it is, or do we have to wait for the book?
So I don't know. I think people already know this if they follow me. My personal book is my personal argument for God's existence is the contingency argument, and I believe that it is. I don't think there's any way around it. I think it does lead to very good argument for God's existence. For me it even is better than the Kalam cosmological argument, the design argument, for reasons I don't want to entertain here because then it's going to be a massive digression. But the contingency argument, I think, is the number one argument on the market.
Brilliant. Okay, Malik Gharbi has a question. Why is it difficult to be a scientist and a believer in God nowadays?
I think this will vary from one situation to another, guys. I think that depending on where you are in the world, I don't think that scientist means not believing in God. I don't think that's always the case. But I do find that, like I said, scientists who don't have any background in philosophy or theology make poor interpretations about the grand schemes of things. So I believe that definitely there needs to be a strong alignment of learning science as well as philosophy. I think philosophy is so incredibly important. There's I forgot his name. I think Massimo Pigliucci. He's a very philosopher of science, right? So he's an atheist. But he is a biologist and a philosopher of science. And there was a paper or something that I read of him where he said he asked big people, Neil deGrasse Tyson, Lawrence Krauss, have they taken any course on philosophy? And they replied in the negative. And yet these guys are amazing scientists, but some of the metaphysics and philosophy they bring out is terrible, really poor, right? So, and this was coming out from a massive, person. Massimo Pigliucci is not a low-time guy. He's very well known in the field.
Brilliant. Absolutely. And to move on, just a suggestion from Salah Mesli is a webinar for this argument, inshallah. Okay. As in the contingency argument.
Actually, that might be something we could do, Sheikh, because we've done this. So I've done the contingency argument on Al-Balagh Institution. We've done it offline at Fatima Elizabeth as well in London, but we've never done as a webinar, Sheikh. Now the thing is with the contingency argument, guys, is that unlike the design argument or the Kalam cosmological argument, it requires a lot of prep work, right? So for anyone who's watching, if you've attended my course on contingency argument, The first hour has nothing to do with the argument. The first hour is just setting up the foundations of the argument. So you need to know something called modality, what is possible, what is impossible, the difference between metaphysical possibility, logical possibility, scientific possibility. And once those distinctions are in place, then we can start off the argument. In the absence of those, you will never be able to appreciate the argument in its fullest strength. So whether we should do that in a webinar, maybe we can discuss that, Sheikh. But let's see.
Sure.
Let's see. We might have a surprise.
Inshallah.
We don't know.
Inshallah. Okay. And the philosopher MMA is back. How would Dr. Shoaib critique pantheism and also the dualistic and non-dualistic concept of God? So maybe if you can break that down very briefly for some of our younger students and then answer that question.
Okay, so just pantheism, at least in its traditional form, simply means that everything is part of God. So this nature is God, right? I am part of God. This chair that I'm sitting on, the house, is all God. Everything is just God, right? Now the problem for this position is simply, again, it comes back to the contingency argument. A God, at least in the traditional Abrahamic sense, cannot be something that is contingent, i.e., it cannot have things that involve change, because then that God is a limited being of a kind. A God is omnipotent, omniscient, non-temporal, outside of time and outside of space. And the reason why those arguments exist is because God does not go through change. I'm, of course, summarizing a massive critique in a few sentences, but the fundamental idea here is that nature is contingent, therefore contingencies cannot be a necessary being, right? And because of that, pantheism is not an option, at least for me. God knows best.
Yeah. What about the dualistic and non-dualistic concept of God? Could you explain that? And
so that would be, I think, on a case-by-case basis, right? Because there are immaterial versions of dualism and material versions of dualism. But fundamentally put, a necessary being means it can only be one. If there's more than one God, then that means they're no longer necessary beings. They're contingent, because there's the possibility of there being others. So for me, contingency argument rules out any non-monotheistic versions of God.
Brilliant. Jazakallah, Sheikh. Moving on to Farino Jackson. What does Professor Shoaib think of the intelligent design movement in relation to the lack of purpose and creating force in the Darwinian evolution model?
Okay, so these are two questions. One, what do I think about intelligent design? Two, what do I think about purpose in the Darwinian evolution? Okay, and these are two distinctive questions, right? Number one, I personally do not support intelligent design.
Dr. Shoaib, sorry to cut you out. Could you maybe explain to our younger students or younger viewers, what is the intelligent design movement? Okay, who are they? Right, when did it start? What do they argue for?
Right. So the intelligent design movement is simply a bunch of philosophers, scientists and theologians who argue that the universe seems to have indications of design which calls for an explanation and it cannot be explained through chance-like processes. This is what it's trying to say, right? Because evolution, at least Darwinian evolution, simply says that all of these biological entities, they came out through a chance-like process, okay? Whereas intelligent design is saying you cannot attribute certain things to chance because some of these are too complex and too specified for it to have come through a random process. So one instance is the DNA. So the DNA, for example, is just so complicated. So many different base pairs coming together, 3 billion pairs coming together. And that specificity cannot be attributed to chance, right? Another example is there are certain components in your body that they look like engineering components, right? So for example, like a motor or things like the eye, which is like a very specialized camera, right? And those things cannot be attributed to chance. These complexities require us to seek for an intelligent designer. So it's the same thing when you go across in the desert, you see a clock. You're not going to say this clock was made naturally. You believe that the clock has a designer behind it, right? Same way, when we see complexity in the human body and when we see complexity in the universe as a whole, it begs us to ask for, it demands us to ask who or what created this. This could not have come out by chance. So intelligent design seeks to explain that the best explanation for these things is a designer, right? And it cannot have come by randomness. So that's what the intelligent design movement is.
Just to pick up on that. So what's the difference between the design argument and intelligent design?
So design argument has three different variations, okay, broadly speaking. There's the intelligent design argument, which is the biological stuff. So there are things so complex in our biology that they cannot be, coming out from science. So this is mostly where the ID movement resides, okay? This is the territory. Design, there are other kinds of design argument, for example, the fine-tuning argument, where the universe has so many constants and they're so finely tuned, they're in the exact precise values which permit life. If they were adjusted even a slightly, by a slight amount, the universe or life as it is today wouldn't exist, okay? So that's a cosmological type of argument. A third type of argument is, well, the very fact that we have laws of nature in the universe that shows that there's some kind of intelligence infused in this universe, which suggests there might be a design or mind behind it, right? So these are three different kinds. So the intelligent design is mostly focusing on the complexities, sophistications, and specifications in the biology of things. And that's where they reside mostly. Now, I personally think intelligent design is a very weak argument. I don't think it's a strong basis, for my opinion, at least. And there are reasons for that, which we can maybe look into in another session. Now, the second question, however, is purpose. Now, strictly speaking, from a scientific point of view, you cannot understand purposes, right? We know the universe is fine-tuned, right? We know the universe has complicated biology. But how can you look at that and say, aha, this is my final purpose? Can you look at a star and tell you, yes, I need to pray namaz 5 times a day, I will go to heaven and hellfire? No. That purpose didn't come from the stars. That purpose didn't come from looking at the world around you, right? So the fact that science does not give us purpose, and in this particular example, evolution does not give us a purpose, doesn't mean there's no purpose. Right? Because science is not in the business of finding purposes. Purposes come from meaning that you associate with things. Now, our purpose comes from revelation, Quran. We can, like I said, when have you looked at the star and when have you looked at the moon? When have you looked at nature around you and say, yes, I now understand I need to pray 5 times a day? It has never happened. It has never happened, right? So because of that, purposes are not built into creation. Purposes are given to you by instruction, okay? Same thing, when you look at an artifact and you see some fancy things around it, you can guess what its purpose is. You can guess, but you don't know for sure until the guy who made it will tell you this is the purpose of this machine, right? So purpose is not something that is inherent in science nor in nature. It comes through revelation. So for me, the idea that evolution tells us that it seems to be random does not in any way undermine my belief in any shape or form. Nor does I think should undermine any belief for Muslims in terms of rejecting evolution.
And why would you say that, Professor?
Sorry, what? What do you mean by that?
Why doesn't it undermine your belief? If everything is just
Yeah. So the complaint here is that evolution is purposeless. Fair enough. Science is not in the business of finding purposes.
Yeah.
So if it's not in the business of finding purposes, I'm not going to impose purposes that I believe are purposeful. My purpose comes from Quran, not from nature. Like I said, when have you looked at the stars and believe you should pray 5 times a day and you're going to heaven and hellfire? The moon and the stars don't have descriptions in heaven and hellfire. That comes from revelation. Your purpose is given to you by your creator, not by looking at creation. Creation tells you and points to you that there's a creator, that yes, maybe there's a purpose in creating us. What is the purpose cannot come from science. God knows best.
Jazakallah khairan, Sheikh. And I think we've now hit the 59-minute mark. and it's time for us to wrap up. And if there are any further questions, we can then inshallah take them next week. And maybe next week Professor can talk a bit more about the difference between Nabi and Rasul, and how that fits into the whole discussion of evolution, to make this discussion more fruitful as well, inshallah. So I would just like to end up by firstly saying Jazakallah khairan, and thanking Dr. Shoaib for being here with us every week on Tuesday, not Wednesday, on Tuesday, normally at 5 o'clock. Just this week at 6 o'clock, because Professor was talking to a mosque in Trinidad today at 5 o'clock British time, I believe. We were talking about, sorry, on Islam and science as well. Fantastic, mashallah. Jazakallah for your time. And next week, inshallah, hopefully it'll be back to 5 o'clock again, but we will keep you updated. You can always put a reminder. As soon as you see the link, just put a reminder on YouTube or on Facebook, and you'll get a notification on your phones. So do that if you don't want to miss out. And also, I want to say Jazakallah to everyone who's joined us, and Jazakallah to everyone who's asking us these difficult questions, questions that they have on their mind, because that's what it's all about, to ask the questions, to have that discussion. It's not about shunning people and shutting them down. Yeah. It's about questioning. And if we go back to some of our most orthodox schools, like the school of Imam Abu Hanifa, for instance, they were asking all types of questions, and that's what Islam teaches us. When we go back to our tradition, it is about questioning, it is about difficult questions, and then solving those problems as well. We'll finish off with a yes, absolutely.
Yeah, so I just want to say, so for those of you who notice that I sometimes get excited, that's just me bursting out with energy on the topic. So don't feel intimidated by that. That's just me, just kind of feeling happy whenever I talk about Islam and evolution. So don't get swayed away by that.
And does that explain the reason behind the smile at the beginning of the session, Sheikh?
Very possibly, Sheikh.
Yeah, okay.
It's contingent, Sheikh. It's contingent to this stuff.
Fantastic. There is a question here. It's up to you if you want to take it or not.
Go ahead.
Philosopher MMA, the multiverse disproves the design argument. Oh, does the multiverse disprove the design argument? John Lennox says, even if multiverse exists, it won't disprove the design argument, but I didn't quite get that. Can you explain further? Firstly, could you explain what a multiverse is for our younger viewers, inshallah?
Sure. So the multiverse theory is pretty much an extension of string theory, which is this idea that in addition to this universe, there are other universes that exist alongside us, but they're not connected to us, so we cannot travel to them, right? We are closed, as you can say, right? So just imagine like you have hotel rooms, and you can't just go on to the other rooms, right? Think of it like that if you wanted to come up with an analogy. Now, if there are all these multiverses, and some of them could be designed, and some of them are not designed, some of them are more designed than us, what it suggests that our universe is then no longer unique, because out of all the universes the multiverse has, this is one of them, and it has some design, but there are other universes that have no design or more design. So in the grand scheme of things, this universe doesn't really matter. Now, for me, that's enough to kind of neutralize the uniqueness of our universe, if true. That's the point, if true. Now, if John Lennox is saying that it won't disprove the design argument, I personally don't agree with that. And this is one out of several objections that I personally have towards design arguments in general. They're very, very weak as inferences. So if John Lennox does indeed say that it doesn't undermine, I'd like to know his reasons why it wouldn't undermine, because for me it does. If there are multiple universes and ours is one of those, and other universes can be more designed than us or less designed than us, then we are just one out of several probabilities. And if so, there's nothing special about this universe. That, for me, completely undermines the design argument. But God knows best. God knows best. I hope that helps, philosopher. I think it's Yusuf Ponders, by the way. Yusuf, is that you? Just let me know yes or no.
Is Yusuf Ponders from India, Sheikh?
No, he's British, Sheikh.
No, the philosopher MMA is from India. I did ask him or her on YouTube once.
Right, okay.
Okay. But philosopher MMA can let us know, inshallah. But I think let's wrap up, Sheikh. We have gone over time, and I also have to get to another session. So if anyone would like to join us, it's with the Karima Institute, where we'll be very briefly talking about the history of Fatima Elizabeth Cates, the lady herself, rahimahullah. Hussein Tahir, are there any more arguments other than the design and contingency arguments, Professor? There's many, quite a lot of them. The philosopher MMA said, I think, no to being Yusuf Ponders.
All right, okay.
It's just a no, Sheikh. That's all you're getting today, inshallah. But Jazakallah, everyone. Okay. Jazakallah, everyone, once more. And we've gone over time, and we've got to move on to our next session with the Karima Institute. So maybe we'll find some of you there, inshallah. Dr. Shoaib, I'll see you. If you just wait there for a second, inshallah, I will see you after we end our broadcast. Okay, subhanallah wa bihamdihi, subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.